Sean from Private Agenda, and that was the wonderful sounds of Raum by Grauzone, Swiss post-punk, just to get us in the mood for this month's episode of Just Between Us, the monthly residency from Private Agenda on Bloop, where we try and join the dots between the music that we make and those that help us to make it, and attempt at exploring the finer details of collaboration and artistry in the modern creative music ecosystem through conversation and through music. And over the past few months, we've been joined in the London studio by a variety of amazing guests. Kat Kemsley from creative design, visual design duo, Tough Honey Collective, Paul Carr, who's worked with us as a vocal engineer, Tim Abbey from Park Hotel, and Cicely Boston, a superstar mastering engineer. But for this week's episode, with us not able to actually be in the London studio in person, confined to our flats, I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Martin, the other half of Private Agenda, as it were, for the first time actually on Just Between Us. So it's a real thrill. Over the next hour, we're going to be talking about our experience of making music from a distance, what it means to try and work on creative projects when we can't both be in the same room together. But just to get us warmed up, we're going to play a record that we're both really loving at the moment. This is I Feel Alive by Tops.
When I saw you wanted to spend the night with someone else at home, I knew it wasn't right. I feel alive looking at conversation that I did not lay. Faces in the street I wish I didn't recognize. I feel alive looking at you. I feel alive looking at you. Lost nights trying to remember when I'm in your arms. I can finally
That was I Feel Alive, Tops, new album out now on Fat Possum Records. For those of you that haven't tuned into Just Between Us before, Private Agenda is a creative partnership between myself, Sean, and Martin, who's joining me on the show today. And we're both based in two different places, which is the reason why Martin's not been able to join regularly as a guest in the studio in person, as he's based in Berlin, myself in London. And that's meant that we've had to really adopt a whole variety of different approaches when it's come to working on our music together, from periods of quite intense collaboration, working in the studio together, to sharing notes, ideas, demos from afar. And what we really wanted to do over the next hour is to tell you a little bit more about the way that we've worked together over the last few years, share some anecdotes and stories about our musical paths, and try and think through ways that we're able to work whilst basically not being in the same room together in the present times of pandemic, as it were. And really, I thought we could maybe just start going back to the very, very beginning, because actually when Private Agenda first began, Martin was living in Berlin and I was still living in the UK. So thinking back to 2015, actually even before then, actually the summer of 2014, when we wrote Deja Vu, for example.
Yeah, I mean, like, it didn't even seem like it was a big step at the time. It felt very natural to get in touch with you. I think we hadn't been making music for a little while together, but before then we had been very working very closely together for all the time that we were in school together, making music. So it didn't seem like something that was very difficult to do. It didn't seem like something that I had to think about very long. When Nick and I were working on Deja Vu together, it was almost like, oh, I'll just send this to Sean, and that would be the thing that makes sense to do, because I think in the back of my mind you were there already, like kind of singing that little melody quietly into my ear, or nudging us in a certain way. I think that's something that happens naturally when you work together with somebody. Often you ask them questions, you refer to them in your mind without them even having to be there, and you kind of get the response back that you need to get. And I, like in a way, I still do that. Sometimes I guess it's like that what would XYZ do situation, it's a bit of an oblique strategy in a way, trying to put yourself in the position of somebody that you know very well, and soliciting their advice without them necessarily giving it to you. But in this case, I actually did. I called you up and we spoke, and I think very quickly you replied as well. Like these things always, if they're a good fit, they seem to happen very fast, and you got back almost immediately with a recording of yourself, just in your iPhone, singing in there and riffing a little bit over the track. I think you riffed a little bit of saxophone solo, you riffed a bit of vocals, and yeah, that was sort of like the signature on the agreement. You sending that recording over there was the start of a slippery slope, you could say.
It's been going downhill from that point onwards. Maybe
yeah, a very slippery slope.
Should we maybe check out the finished product, as it were? So Deja Vu as it came out on International Feel in 2015, and then maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the elements that came together, bits that were written from a distance, and then actually.
You know what? Just before we dip into the finished product, you know what I have?
What
here?
do you have?
Start by learning, time for your learning. 'Cause I got to give, I got to get, I got to love, and I'm not thinking na 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 na.
Well, some of those lyrics made it.
I think that was the first time I'd actually heard that voice memo I sent to you all those years ago, Martin. So it was quite. Yeah, it was really what an amazing insight actually to hear what was that first impulsive first take. Yeah, it definitely had a feeling of obviously of being raw and quite unrefined, but at the same time, then it's quite interesting actually how much of the vocal melody made it into the released version of the song. Anyway, let's take a listen to that. This is the very first song that we put out on International Feel in 2015. This is Deja Vu. So that was Deja Vu. That was the first single that we put out as Private Agenda. Quite a throwback for us, but interesting to reflect on the fact that actually from the very first thing that we ever worked on, we've been working in two different places, sharing ideas in an asynchronous fashion, in the sense that in different spaces and almost at different times having to respond to what we'd previously done and not being able to look into the sort of whites of each other's eyes to see how we were responding to what we'd made. And if I think a couple of years on from that, an example of something we worked on together that was perhaps the most extreme version of working in two different places at two different times. This was the collaboration that we did with Massimiliano Pagliara for the Feel Live album that came out in 2018. And at the time, I was in Australia doing some research work, and Martin was in Berlin with Massey on the other end of the phone, and we were trying to work out how we'd actually both be able to contribute towards this collaboration together. I think it was really clear that it was Martin that would have his fingers on the keyboard and would have his lips around the mic, as it were. But thinking about how it was that we'd actually be able to work together was a real challenge. But again, I suppose we dip back into the roots, as it were, and there was me next to a sort of motorway or a highway in Canberra, singing into my phone and trying to convince Martin that this is the melody that might well stick. Is that how you remember it, Martin?
The funny thing for me about you being in Canberra was that historically, I mean, not all of the time, but historically, definitely a morning person. Sean, on the other hand, is a verified night owl, and he's definitely the person who is maybe more excited by the prospect of an all-nighter out of the two of us. But correct me if I'm wrong with this, but maybe your creative juices start flowing a little bit later on in the day. Go through the paces, like get through your day, relax, wake up, warm up. All these things have had time to settle a little bit, and maybe for the first time when you were in Australia, our cycles were in sync.
Finally in sync.
So I'd be hopping out of bed bright and early, and you were just getting into your evening step. And we seem to actually kind of like be able to phone up and see eye to eye, which we often can't do in the mornings when I force Sean to get out of bed.
It takes me 3 hours to get going, and don't even think about a vocal recording session before 12. It never ends well. But it was one of those things where I think I certainly had this feeling of dread almost about how difficult it was going to be able to try and convey the ideas that I had particularly for the vocals, but just more broadly for how we might contribute to the track in a way that was refined enough that Martin would be able to work with it as raw material, or that he'd at least be able to understand and translate the ideas I had. But I think we were both really, really delighted with the output of that collaboration in the end.
Yeah. And of course, working with Massey was also really nice because he's an expert collaborator. He works with he knows how to work with people, how much space to give them, and how much the right pace to set at the beginning as well. He's really good at wrapping up projects and overseeing things. He's really, I would say, Massey is CEO of his own company. He knows how to run things smoothly, and that makes creating with him such a pleasure as well.
Would you say that from your experience of working more directly than that I was able to with him on that project, actually, that when you listen to the collaborations across the whole of Feel Live, part of the skill in collaborating that he was able to bring is knowing the amount that the collaborator he was working with wanted to get their fingertips, as it were, or their full.
Often with these things, I think the boundaries at the beginning are unclear to both people. Like you've got to figure each other out. There's a little bit of, it's not like second guessing. It's not like circling. It's sort of like kind of treading carefully. Like as somebody coming in, I don't want to expect too much of my contribution. I don't expect that we're going to be the gem in the middle of the track or whatever. But in the same way, you really want to help each other. You want to give the person what they want to get out of this collaboration, or you kind of want to meet their expectations at least. And I mean, the session that we did in person was pretty much it was a classic situation just like that, because we were talking and we were just talking about the different synths that we like to use. We had a little play together, and then he showed me a couple of tracks, and then we chose one that he said he kind of imagined maybe this track would be the best one, but there's also a backup just in case. So he's always providing a safety net. I think we both want something good to come of it. At the same time, we're both treading very carefully because we're not sure of the other's expectations of what should happen. And in that way, making a really encouraging environment, providing those safety nets, I think in this case was key to making something that felt like it was natural, felt like it was a meeting in the middle of both of what we had to offer. call this the 50-50 mix for those who run out of tonic halfway through drinking. 50% gin, 50%.
It's the like we were talking about. It's the middle ground. It's the perfect mix. For some collaborations, it's the perfect mix.
I'm gonna put a splash of sparkling water in there. I'm not sure if this is gonna save anything.
Just to take the edge off.
Cool.
That was A Winter in Los Angeles, the opening track on Massimiliano Pagliaro's 2018 album called Feel Live, and that was a project that we worked on with Massi. Thinking a little bit about the type of collaborations that we've done in the past, one of the things that I suppose that we've thought about really deeply, not just with the collaborations that we've done, but also in our own creative projects together, has been this idea of boundaries and how rigidly or how loosely to impose, particularly conceptual boundary around the work. And one work I feel that we were quite strong on defining the terms of what our creative collaboration was going to look like was for our debut album, Il de Rêve, where we went in with a really, really strong sense about what we wanted the visual world to be for this record, what we wanted the experience of listening to the record to be.
I think it's tricky with concepts because you don't. It's very easy to present a concept and for it to feel a little bit like a gimmick or like just something you're using to be able to talk about the piece of work that you're doing. And I think in a way, perhaps I didn't really understand what it meant as an artist to put together a concept, a mood board, and use it as a tool to help get the work done. And when it really comes into its own is when you're working as part of a team. So with Il de Rêve, we collaborated with lots of people. One particular collaboration I can think of, which sort of illustrates this point, is when we were working with Jonty and Kat, the filmmakers at Tough Honey, and they were putting together a visual response to the music and the album, and I mean immediately it was clear that working with two hugely creative individuals like them, that we were, if we were at any point to put up any kind of boundary or barrier, we were going to restrict the possibility, the potential of the work that we could do together, and so we thought a long time about how we were going to approach them, how we were going to present the project to them, how we were going to sort of open up our world to them in a way that would allow them to respond and add their own ideas and add their own interpretations to the stuff that we'd already done. And I think when you do that with just like showing a series of tracks which don't have a particular kind of overarching idea to them, it's quite difficult without getting down to like very specific explanatory words like, oh, this track is cinematic, this track I feel is a landscape, this track is XYZ. And I think that having a way to describe a work in a broader sense, in a way which is more like a mood board, really, like opening up some kind of story or world that surrounds the whole thing, it makes it a lot easier for somebody else to contribute their ideas, and also made us a little bit more open to accepting these extensions, these paths, these avenues that we might not have otherwise explored. What was the most unexpected visual for you?
Probably PSR, actually.
Yeah.
The disco ball, because I suppose that theme and that basically that icon, as it were, it was almost, what was exciting was it was almost like they had seen not just their work as a visual complement specifically to the album and as a standalone piece, but actually that it had to speak more broadly to what we had done throughout a full body of work as well. So that was a really interesting interpretation, and that was something that was perhaps was something unexpected from perhaps the way that we were thinking about the music making for that album, which was much more but there were certain limitations, I think, definitely placed on the approach towards the music making, the bare essentials, the type of feeling that would have to be evoked, as it were, and a very specific speaking to bits of the way we'd made music before, rather than having a much more expansive palette. It was much more refined, I think. That was PSR, The Point of Safe Return, the last track on Ildirev, the debut album from Private Agenda. What we've been doing over the last few minutes has been thinking about how we collaborate together, how we think about projects, and how we collaborate with other people. And these sort of questions are really very much on our mind as we're writing and producing a new full-length album, and we're trying to do it from a distance. So Martin and I are unable to do this in the same room together, and this is bringing up all kinds of questions about how actually best to work together on this material. And it's also raising all kinds of questions, I suppose, and creating doubts around the way that we'd ordinarily try and work on a large body of music like this. One of the things that isn't perhaps immediately obvious when we present Private Agenda, it seems like it's just the two of us, Martin and I, working on music together, and that is the sole collaboration. But there are so many other collaborations that go into making any piece of music that we make together, from friends we play music to direct collaborators, other musicians who play instruments on the piece of music, to bits of advice that we pick up from friends on elements of the mix, to contributions toward the visual side of the work that we make. And some of these elements of our music making, as we're writing a new album at the moment, are compromised in the sense that we can't be in the same room, as it were, and directly get that immediate reflection upon what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always been really, really important in the process of making something to have other people, not just to share the music with, but to listen to the music with in the same room, in person. And there's nothing, there really isn't a replacement. You can't even do it over Zoom or whatever. You have to be in the same room, because as soon as you do that, you're there's some kind of magic that happens where you listen to the music that you're listening to through the other person's ears, and they don't have to say anything. They don't have to give you any feedback for you to be able to understand what that person is feeling listening to the music. There's some kind of transcendence where you listen as a group, you listen as another person rather than yourself when they're there in person. And yeah, I mean, truth be told, there is no replacement. There isn't anything quite as good, and it's tough, and and often because of this, I find that the path of working on a piece of music from having it recorded to completion is often one which takes many detours, and some of those detours are dead ends, and sometimes it goes in a direction which needs to be reversed, and then you need to explore different things, and then you come back to it the next day and you've got a different mindset. So I mean, timescales for making music, I feel, because of this, are definitely stretching out, and they're taking longer, despite having so much more time to be on your own with the tracks, because there's no objectivity, there's no stepping back. I mean, on the positive side, Sean and I have a really good remote working relationship, because just of the nature of how we've been working together for the past many years, and that's very unique to the way that we work together. I think that's always between two individuals. There's going to be a very kind of unique relationship. There's going to be a lot of talking going on without talking, kind of like the language of a few words that you pass between each other. The fact that I send music regularly to Sean, I know that he listens, is a way of communicating with him as well, and in a way, that support structure has been the thing that's caught us here and enabled us to continue working together, even though it's a little bit more difficult when there's no instantaneous feedback.
Yeah, one thing that's become a little clearer for me, I think, in terms of thinking through the way that we work together, has been to think much more deeply and carefully about the workflow, and trying to almost get into your mindset as to where you're at in terms of working with a piece of music, and then in turn thinking really carefully about what that means in terms of the way that I speak and give feedback about that piece of work, the way that I collaborate with you, the way that I interject on a piece of music, in the sense that, for example, there are times where there needs to be a more exploratory, experimental phase, playing with the parameters of the track. And that means that in terms of the feedback, it can be more concrete in terms of trying to impose barriers on what's been laid down, but sometimes very deliberately being a little bit more open to it. And so there's this almost paradoxical thing going on where, although we're apart, not in the same room, I can't sort of give my impression of what's going on by looking at you straight in the face. I have to be more, actually even more in touch with the way that you're working through this project, and actually fundamentally the way we're working together. It's quite a bizarre phenomenon, but it's something that's become clearer to me actually as we've been trying to work together from a distance.
Yeah, maybe it's helpful also to describe the way that we share music as well is by having a Dropbox, and often so I whenever I do a session on a track, I'll bounce it into the Dropbox straight away, and often there won't be any other additional communication with that. So it will just be the fact that there's an updated track, and Sean will have an idea of the schedule that I'm working to. So we decide on a series of tracks to work on over a time period, and then we'll be working on those tracks, probably 4 tracks at the same time. And then he'll be receiving the updates in real time, and then giving me commentary when he sees fit. So it really is the sole form of communication is the updated music, and then and then sometimes things don't go to plan, and I'll be expecting some feedback, or Sean will give the wrong kind of feedback, and it happens. I think it happens to everybody that, like, especially when when there's something that takes a lot of time apart, like giving feedback, writing, listening does take a long time. Also working on the tracks takes a long time as well, and sometimes you'll come together and you will have both gone on different tracks or slightly divergent tracks, and at this point sometimes there can even be bad feelings floating around, and this has happened plenty of times between us, and it's really important to actually just talk about how it's going, talk not necessarily about the music, but talk about like how much sleep you're getting, or how you're feeling, or what other commitments you've got, and often some of these conversations are the most useful for us to have, the ones where we don't talk about the music at all, and they can also be some of the more motivating conversations that we have as well. The things that help me to see things from Sean's perspective also help me to refresh my view of what we're working on, and that's really important.
No, the only thing I think I'd add to that is that there's been a heightened emphasis, I think, on being careful in the way that we try and read the room. And what I mean by that is the way that you would ordinarily give feedback, engage, actually just quite fundamentally understand the process that you're mutually going through together as you're working on a project has changed by having to work in the way that we are at the moment. And I think that's definitely made me, exactly like you just outlining, Martin, much more sensitive in the way that that feedback is given, in the sense that when we talk about feedback being good or bad, right and wrong, it can often be the case even that objectively the feedback you give might ultimately be right, in inverted commas, but actually very specifically understanding the stage almost that you're at in a project, and almost really understanding the type of feedback that you sort of need to give, the tone of delivery, is actually really, really quite fundamental. And it becomes more difficult, of course, when you don't have that, when you're not in the same room together, when you don't see the whites of someone's eyes, and you see the sleepless nights and the hours spent looking at the grid on Ableton. Almost, it's definitely something that I feel is delicate but hugely significant in the way that we work together. Actually, it's very, very important to find that balance and to get that stage of that element, as it were, of the collaboration correct.
Thank you for that. Sometimes Sean just tells me what I need to hear rather than what he wants to say. which is important because I'm also a delicate flower.
That was a new single from Nazca Lines, Pure Luxury. It's out now on Memphis Industries. Another great single. We've been thinking over the last hour or so. I don't actually know how long it's been. The minutes feel like hours. The days feel like hours. I don't know. Time feels different in time feels different in this time. We've been reflecting on what it means to be making music together, collaborating not just in the current music ecosystem, but also in quarantine, collaborating in quarantine. And this one's been quite a unique, a bit of a different show. Whereas normally we've invited outside the band, as it were, collaborators that we've worked on, vocal engineers, mastering engineers, people that are involved in the musical worlds that we operate in and that we've learned a lot from. This has been quite unique, and it's almost felt rather self-reflective. Martin and I talking about the music that we've worked on together the last few years, and particularly music that we've made where we've actually not been able to be in the same room together. It's been slightly strange, and I've been quite careful, I feel like, in almost not interviewing Martin, but trying to have a more sort of natural conversation about our music making together. But it's quite
it's so nice of you to have me on.
Oh, absolute pleasure. Anytime. You're very much welcome again. But yeah, and I'd be really interested in in your feedback on how you feel that this format for the show has gone. And suppose it's sort of like the little advert we host this monthly residency called Just Between Us. And if you're interested in coming on the show, or you have any questions or feedback about Bloop Radio and the show, then do just drop us a line. You know where to find us, links below. But we're rifling ahead towards till the end of the show. And I thought maybe we could just do a little bit of looking ahead, talking a little bit about plans that we have working together. Visions, hopes for the future. As we talked about just before, we played the new single from Las Calanes. We were talking about a new full-length album that we're working on together, thinking about strategies of ways we can work through and be able to complete that record potentially, actually not in the same room together, but also preparing a number of remixes and other collaborations from a distance. So I suppose in many ways, Martin being able to talk through strategies about how we can work from a distance and actually complete these projects from afar has become a really pronounced part of the way that we work day to day. And so it's been actually really, really, really interesting and really useful just to be able to sort of do a bit of self-reflection, a bit of inward looking, as it were, about how we've done it in the past.
Yeah, the most important thing about finding a way to work together is talking about how you're working together and being actively reflective in these things. It's like anything. If you really want to improve something you're doing, you have to first take stock of what it is you're doing at the moment, and then often the solutions will present themselves when you have a good chat about the way things are currently. It gives you an opportunity to both in a sort of like a neutral environment to visualize how things might be. And in a way, that's what we're doing now. I'm still trying to learn things from Sean, still trying to get to know him better and find ways of working together. And like I said at the very beginning, a lot of it's about knowing somebody so well that you have their voice in the head, even when you're not with them in person. So you're able to use that as a collaborator, kind of like a little. Would you say you're the angel on my left shoulder or the devil on my right shoulder, Sean?
I don't know, maybe the devil, but I don't know what sort of level of hell I've descended into. I think it depends. Yeah, it's been quite an interesting approach to the show, actually doing it not in a scheduled slot in the studio in central London, but I guess it's something that we're gonna be repeating come next month. So you're most welcome to come back on the show next month again. Well, like a flash, we've come to the end of the show today. Thank you very, very much for tuning into Just Between Us, monthly residency from Private Agenda on Bloop Radio. And we're going to leave you with a song that is both captivating and beautiful, and with a message that we can all subscribe to in these times. This is Donny Hathaway's One Day We'll All Be Free. Enjoy, stay healthy, stay well, and we'll see you next month. Much love.
Just don't let the spin get you down. Things are moving fast. Hold on tight and you will last. Keep yourself respect your manly pride. Get yourself in gear. Keep your stride. Never mind your fears. Brighter days will soon be here. keep growing.